Steven Interviews You. Welcome, everyone, back to another episode of Steven Interviews You. This is episode number 15. I'm Steven Vitz, and this is where I sit down and have a good chat with a special guest. And his name would be, introduce yourself.
Jake Bolden.
Hi, Jake. Thanks for being on the show. And let's get right to it. First of all, what is your backstory as a sports fan? What got you into sports in the first place?
I guess for me, it's mostly my family. Growing up in a household that kind of everyone in my family grew up playing sports. I was always encouraged as a way to be active in our family. So, growing up playing a lot of sports, baseball was always my calling. But growing up, I played basketball, I played football. Really loved all the local teams. I am from Nashville, so naturally, I'm a Titans fan. And then, of course, if you know me, I'm host of Blue Raider podcast, where I talk all sports there for MTSU. So I have a natural background in cheering for those teams as well. But sports is just always a great way. I guess the best way I've heard it put is it's a great way to combine a lot of people that, especially in today's world where there's a lot of things going on that might divide us. Sports just seems to bring a lot of people together, even if you're on differing sidelines. It's always a great way for community and fellowship and that kind of thing. So I guess sports is just a great way to bring a lot of people together.
Yeah. So in particular, college sports, you happen to be a Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders fan, and you are the host of the Blue Raider podcast. Tell me how that got started. How did that come about? Where was it some sort of moment, or was it somebody encouraging you to start doing it? What went into that?
Well, to get a little bit, I don't want to go too deep in the weeds as far as how I landed there, but for the most part, I started in high school. I was a local sports writer covering high school, and then eventually I got called up to cover MTSU beat there my senior year of high school, and then it carried over into college a little bit. I had no aspirations to actually do journalism. It was really just a way to have a little extra cash on hand when I was in high school. But I really enjoyed kind of the perks that came with sports journalism. So I followed that side gig all the way through college. And then when I finished college, I had a degree in exercise science, and I've gone on to do other things with my actual career. But journalism has always been kind of a side hobby turned passion for me. And that's kind of where the podcast came in. I created some relationships with Oliver Baltz, who used to host the Blue Raider basketball hoops podcast. And so he disbanded that all the way back in about 2019, prior to COVID kind of sweeping everyone by storm. And that kind of went away from him during the Kermit Davis days. And then we hired Nick McDevitt. And so he just kind of, the hoops podcast fell by the wayside. And I always kind of talked to him about maybe re-upping it at some point in time, but incorporating all of the Blue Raider athletics. And then MTSU let go of longtime head coach Rick Stockstill 2 seasons ago at the end of 2023. And I thought, well, this is kind of my opportunity to see my way back into MTSU athletics with the new coaching staff changes. So in December of 2023, whenever they hired now head coach Derek Mason, I seized the opportunity and started the Blue Raider podcast from the ground up. At that point on, Oliver has always had the invitation extended if he ever wanted to jump back on, which he's a guest from time to time, but I am the solo host and founder of the show. But I've been going on strong for what'll be a 2-year anniversary this December.
Yeah, that's great. Just with me, it was just a thing where I just wanted to get started on my podcast, which is titled Bobcat Corner. That's like the main series I do on my channel. It's kind of interesting where a podcast will take you. So it's that kind of thing. So sticking to Middle Tennessee, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. For those that are not familiar with Murfreesboro and what that place is about, take me through it. What is the culture like there as far as being a college sports town goes? What is Murfreesboro, Tennessee like?
It's not like your typical college town, which has always been frustrating, especially for a lot of people that are MTSU fans. And to be truthful with you, very few people here are solo MTSU fans. I like to consider myself a unicorn or a Pegasus, if you will, in reference to MTSU's Lightning. But there's just it's a transitional city, if you will. We're about a 45 minutes south to an hour south of Nashville. So a lot of people that actually work in Nashville will commute from Murfreesboro. So a lot of people that live here spend most of their time in Nashville. And the same go for a lot of our alumni. Very few people that actually go to school here at MTSU live within the city limits. A lot of them are in the surrounding counties and they commute into Murfreesboro. And for the most part, a lot of people here grow up UT fans. So to draw this all the way back to sports, a lot of people have shared fandoms here. You're not, like I said, you're not going to find just a true MTSU fan just by the local nature of being 45 minutes south of Nashville. So you even have some Vanderbilt fan carryover, but predominantly it's going to be shared fandom with UT and even a good bit of Alabama fans because of football. But that's always been the biggest struggle for a lot of people here in Murfreesboro that want to make this a quote unquote college town. It's not necessarily a walkable city. That's one thing that has made it tough as far as making nightlife favorable to the student athletes, as well as even the student experience alone. One thing that is a drawback again from having students that don't live on campus is we have weekday CUSA games. A lot of students don't live on campus, so they're not on campus for the weekday CUSA game. And then when Saturday rolls around, well, there's a high chance that you grew up a Tennessee fan. Well, if Tennessee's playing that same weekend, playing the same time, you're going to stay at home with the family, watch UT play, rather than come to an MTSU game. Although, all things considered, if the team was a little bit better, that might change. That dynamic might change a little bit. You might find students wanting to come back to campus to see those games. But right now, during the week, there's just not much of a draw due to, obviously, they're not performing particularly well over the last 4 seasons. But that's always been the biggest struggle. I think just creating that fandom, that experience for students that want to keep coming back to MTSU. That I remember the days when I was in college and XYZ was really good, and I enjoyed my time in the student section, where right now a lot of these kids that are here at MTSU aren't getting that experience because there's just not much memorable going on. But the tide is turning in other sports. Unfortunately, the big moneymaker in football hasn't been where it needs to be to kind of create that atmosphere. But hopefully things are trending for us here in the near future to kind of create that balance, because a lot of things are in place for this university to really explode. They're doing a lot more downtown to make this more of a nightlife for the student athlete and the students as well. They're trying to create more housing, temporary housing, like apartments, as well as hotels. So the city itself has kind of embraced the growth that the university is seeing, but we haven't seen that carry over to the athletics, and then eventually that carry over to the student body, who then buys into what the athletic department is selling.
Yeah. So you mentioned other Tennessee schools, fans of those schools coming into the area. That was going to be one of my questions. Like the general support for Middle Tennessee, the Blue Raiders, any sport, uh, compared to like Memphis Tigers or Tennessee Volunteers, for example. Uh, that was going to be one of my next questions. Is like, especially when the team is doing well, any sport at all. Uh, do you think the support would be there for the Blue Raiders if they are doing well in a sport?
The best example I have is women's basketball. The best program that we have here year in and year out at MTSU is the women's basketball program, and it um, is by no happenstance that they just happen to have the top 25 attendance year in and year out as well, and women and all of women's basketball, because that team wins. So to say that you can pull a top 25 attendance record at women's basketball in the city of Murfreesboro would lead me to believe that if your football program had the same level of success, your baseball program, your men's basketball program had that same level of success, you could have those kind of numbers. Now, obviously, women's basketball extrapolated out doesn't necessarily pull the type of money that men's basketball and football does. But to say that on a weekly basis that you would have 75% capacity at men's basketball, 75% capacity at football isn't possible. I think it at 100% is, because women's basketball is able to get that draw. So clearly there's some level of buy-in. And granted, credit to Rick Insel and Matt Insel and the program that they've built for women's basketball, because there's a strong following of people who love the Lady Raiders but don't love any other sport, and that's because they're winners. For 20 years that Rick Insel has been here in Murfreesboro, he's a winner. And so again, they didn't, not necessarily luck or anything like that. They've created their own luck by winning a lot of basketball games, and that just makes a lot of people fall in love with them. So I think, to answer your question, in a world where we have consistency, which is something that this program hasn't really had over the last 20 years, like women's basketball has had. Same with men's basketball over the Kermit Davis years. He didn't really catch his stride into the later half of his career, and then he moved on to Ole Miss, and then the keys got handed over to McDevitt, who had a rough start to his career here in Murfreesboro. So once there's some level of continuity, I know the fans would be there. It's just there's that consistency we've yet to really find that, and it's going to be harder to find at the G5 level altogether. I mean, if coach does well, they're not going to be here. And Rick Insell, again, a guy that has been offered more money to go other places, has stayed around at Murfreesboro, and again, you see how that has grown here in Murfreesboro. So, is it possible? Absolutely, but it's becoming harder and harder to see that come to fruition just because of all the nuance that is being a good G5 program.
Yeah. So going right to it, the football program for Middle Tennessee, the Blue Raiders. Uh, what, in your opinion, because you followed the Blue Raiders for a long time now, what, in your opinion, was like one of the biggest highlights of Blue Raider football? Like one of the best moments, years that the Blue Raiders have had in recent history?
Recent history has been really tough because you don't there's not necessarily anything you can point your finger at. I know 4 years ago they won the Hawaii Bowl over San Diego State, and that was a very big deal. Even our starting quarterback Nick Vadiato who's a redshirt senior now, or I guess technically he's a graduate senior now. Um, he was a starting freshman quarterback of that team that won the Hawaii Bowl. So I guess that would be my closest, most recent memory. But in terms of football, the glory days are well behind this program. I know they competed for a CUSA championship 5 years ago and lost with too many men on the field, and that's something that is still sits sour with a lot of fans in today's game. But collectively, it's been a long time really since we've been in the quote unquote heydays. You'd have to go all the way back to 2008, 2009. New Orleans Bowl champion quarterback Dwight Dasher. Those are days that I know a lot of people who are if they're Blue Raider fans and they're listening, they're thinking those were the glory days with Dasher and Tanner in the backfield, who would go on to play for the Dallas Cowboys and have a good NFL career. But it's been hard to really be an MTSU fan through these last decade or so, because those days have certainly passed us. But I think we're in a situation collectively as a university. There's lingering possibility of changes, not only just with the football program, but also with the university and their admin leadership. So I would like to think at some point there might be a changing of tide that we can kind of get ourselves back into something to be excited about on the gridiron.
So as far as rivalries go, and this is like more of a fun question here. You guys, Middle Tennessee, you guys are tied with Western Kentucky very much. And I've heard about this rivalry a lot, but for me, I don't yet understand what was like the backstory or history behind the Western Kentucky Middle Tennessee rivalry. Could you walk me through that? What is that rivalry like between Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky?
Well, to date it, I suppose a lot of it is proximity, and the rivalry itself is called the 100 miles of hate, because if you go 100 miles up I-24, you land in Bowling Green, and same for them, you go south, you're in Murfreesboro. So it's a very uniquely named because of that exact distance mark of 100 miles. But the rivalry has spanned my entire life. I guess, like for most people who cheer for their teams, it's just deep rooted that you do not like that university. And Western Kentucky falls on that for a lot of MTSU fans. The rivalry really dates to basketball. That is the area where a lot of your old heads are really going to date this rivalry. Although the thing that's ironic about it is Western Kentucky owned Middle Tennessee for a lot of their tenure. I mean, we know how good Western Kentucky was in the back half there of the 20th century. So MTSU had it rough, but as of late, the basketball rivalry has definitely been renewed because of the balance of both of these programs. Obviously, the recruiting grounds are very close to one another, being in the same conference, dating all the way back to the Sun Belt days in the late 90s. So these two programs have been in lock and step for the last 30 years. So it's always a game that you look forward to, no matter. I know in football, it's been at least, I think it's been 8 years since MTSU has beaten Western Kentucky, but it's still a game every year that you look forward to, because as a rivalry goes, anything could happen. And we've seen that women's basketball. The Lady Raiders had the longest Conference USA active win streak last year. They go to Bowling Green, a game where the Lady Raiders were up by double digits and ended up losing that game, a game that no one thought Western Kentucky had any chance of. But that's just kind of how this rivalry goes. And again, that goes well beyond hoops. I mean, football, softball, baseball. Western Kentucky top 25 baseball program this last year, and MTSU goes to Bowling Green and picks one off and knocks them out of the top 25. So it's just something that I know in the world of G5, a lot of people do know this rivalry, and of course, I love it. I think hoops is where this rivalry really shines its best because of the amount of parity that's in that rivalry. But again, I'll keep bringing it back to this. If football could be a little bit better, kind of snap this losing streak that they have, you could really see this rivalry take off more in a more national spotlight.
Yeah, I've heard about it from other college football fans about this rivalry between Western Kentucky and Middle Tennessee. It's very interesting stuff from what I'm hearing. So I'm keeping an eye out for this rivalry whenever it happens in any sport. So with that said, with other rivalries, what are some of the other rivalries that Middle Tennessee has with other teams, whether it's in Conference USA or elsewhere?
I don't know that there's in Conference USA terms, there's not really much. I guess in terms of football, there hasn't been anyways, just because again the last couple of years we haven't really created any sort of nuance. But women's basketball, there's a budding rivalry with Liberty, and really. I guess if I take a step back, maybe Liberty versus everybody in Conference USA. A lot of people don't, we don't tend to like Liberty just because of their advantages financially over the rest of the conference. So we seem to think that they kind of buy their way to the top of this conference. So I guess in that spirit, a lot of people don't like Liberty. Women's basketball, though, is definitely one in the last 2 years has been a very budding rivalry. There's a lot of off-court stuff that happens there with the Lady Raiders program and Liberty in particular. As far as Conference USA goes, that would be probably where it spans as far as a true rivalry. Locally, though, I know that there's always been a rivalry between MTSU and Memphis. Again, that dates back years, especially in football. But football has kind of taken that step ahead of MTSU over the last couple of years. I mean, they're likely to be at the G5 representative in the college football playoffs this upcoming season. So. Um, those rivalries have kind of fallen by the wayside. And then, of course, a lot of the universities around here that you grew up in the OVC with, Tennessee Tech, Austin P, even Murray State in basketball, a lot of those have kind of fallen by the wayside because, again, MTSU has moved on into the FBS of football. And so those are not necessarily appealing rivalry games to be scheduling anymore. Murray State's one that they've renewed in men's basketball, and I think a lot of people get excited about that because those are two strong fan bases. That again, this dates back into the 80s and 70s where those two teams went together on a regular basis in the OVC. So those are the ones that I think are most important, but they all pale in comparison to the MTSU Western Kentucky 100 miles of hate.
Okay, so sticking to Conference USA, the conference that Middle Tennessee plays in. What are your general thoughts on Conference USA as a whole, how it's being run? Uh, Not just Commissioner Judy McLeod, but just everything associated with Conference USA. How do you feel being in Conference USA, and where do you think, uh, big picture, where do you think Conference USA is headed?
Well, things certainly got scary 2 years ago when there was a lot of annexation of Conference USA, and Conference USA obviously is the gateway for the FCS to join the FBS, much like we had Missouri State and Delaware this year, who, to no surprise, have done particularly well in their first year at the FBS level. So I think Conference USA, as far as a feeder, maybe some people look at it as that halfway, but I think in the football space, they've really embraced that. We've seen the likes of Sam Houston, who competed for a conference championship in their second year, Jack State, who competed for a championship and won last year and their third year, in their second year of Conference USA. We all know what Liberty has done since they've made the jump to the FBS. And so making the Fiesta Bowl 2 years ago. So I think you have to give credit to Conference USA, although they may be the quote unquote feeder. A lot of these schools have made a name for themselves right out the gate, and so that's something to be commended for what Judy McLeod. Again, hindsight's always 2020, and I'm sure Judy McLeod would not come forward and say we knew Liberty was going to go to the Fiesta Bowl, and we knew Jack State was going to compete in this conference from the get go. You can't pinpoint those, but obviously they have some level of feasibility studies within these markets that have worked out particularly well for the early going. So maybe in 10 years we look back and say these moves were bad, but right now they seem to be great. And even MTSU staying in Conference USA, I know there's a lot circulating about them potentially moving to the MAC a couple years ago, and there was always a question about should they have left the Sun Belt because of look where Sun Belt football is now. I think overall, in the scheme of football, I don't think the Conference USA is the worst conference. I think, them and the MAC are kind of neck and neck in that regard. But I think where Conference USA, I think, is a better conference than maybe people give them credit for, is where they stand in all the other sports. In baseball, they've been a two-bid league for at least all of MTSU's tenure in Conference USA. That dates back over 10 years. And then you talk about men's basketball for, I think, the second straight year, they finished top 10 in Ken Palm ratings, Massey ratings, as far as conferences go. So they're not a two-bid league and haven't been in MTSU's tenure, but they are that one conference out, just I would say below the A10 as far as becoming a two-bid league. And so very competitive on the hardwood. I already touched on baseball, but softball is another one that has had super regional participants like Liberty. So I think collectively, Conference USA is way ahead of the likes of MAC and Sun Belt and all those other sports where maybe, again, people in the national spotlight look down on Conference USA in football. But I would argue that there's a lot more parity in Conference USA than what you would have in the MAC, where you have some of your front runners and they're consistent front runners, and even same for the Sun Belt. I think top to bottom, there's too big of a gap, where Conference USA, I think, is a lot more competitive top to bottom.
So you discussed conference realignment rumors a little bit here with uh, potential talk of Western Kentucky and Middle Tennessee maybe possibly going to another conference, whether that be the MAC or anywhere else. Just a little bit more about that. When those rumors, and they're just rumors, when those rumors just got started about maybe they could go to the MAC, uh, what were your thoughts initially about that?
Don't go. Do not leave Conference USA, to put it blunt. I think a lot of people were eager to make the jump out of Conference USA because, again, you had the mass exodus of a lot of the original Conference USA members moving on to the American Athletic. And so you thought to yourself, this is our opportunity to get out of this dying conference. Again, hindsight is 2020, and MTSU deciding to stay was the best financial decision the university ever made. Obviously, they made money from all those exit fees, but collectively, and excuse me if I'm going to be all over the place with this timeline, but you look back at basketball, you have UAB and North Texas who leave for the American Athletic Club. They both make the NIT championship game. They do not receive any of that money. Those that stayed in the conference got that money. You'll look at Liberty and their Fiesta Bowl, their entry. Again, the conference makes money from Liberty's representation in a New Year's Six Bowl. Those are just a few examples of the money that was then brought in because MTSU stayed. And because of that, I know the tax documents were released. So they're always 2 years behind, but MTSU by far and away made, it was a ridiculous amount of money. I'm not going to put it out there what it was because I don't remember exactly, but I know it was by far and away more money than any other Conference USA team had made, and they only receive those benefits because your newest insurance don't get those benefits, and those that left, obviously, they pay their exit fees, and they're not going to see a dime of that. So MTSU and Western Kentucky, for that matter, being two of the four that stayed, received a big surplus of all those financial gains from those postseason runs by those two sports, and so. All things considered, it looks great on paper now. And again, they're still circulating about them going to the MAC. And the MAC, I say a rumor, them going to the MAC was a legitimate conversation that was being had. Where the negotiations halted was the MAC wanted Western Kentucky and MTSU to make it. There was no if, and, or buts. We were a package deal. Western was ready to make the move to the MAC, and then MTSU was not ready to make the move. And I think MTSU, again, holding all the chips there, we're saying, Western needs us more than we need them. And again, maybe that's more the rivalry talking, but I think that that's true because Western, I think, again, for geography reasons, if we both went to the MAC, we would be very out of, maybe not Bowling Green as much as Murfreesboro, but we would geographically be out of place for the MAC. And so if we were to go by ourselves, we would be putting a lot of a burden on travel, which, all things considered, Conference USA is geographically makes no sense. You're as far west as Las Cruces and El Paso, and you're as far east and northeast as Delaware. So, and you're as far south as Miami. So the travel is already bad, but I think you need to have a geographic rivalry like you do with Western. So those two programs going together, I think we will always be that way. Western will never go anywhere without us, and vice versa. Again, just because of scheduling, the history of this rivalry, and the programs are as far as institutions go, are again neck and neck as far as enrollment, the amount of money that these universities bring in. It just makes sense for these two to be together. So I've kind of gone off on this tangent to say, but the move to the MAC I don't think made sense at that time, and certainly looking back on it, it doesn't make sense at all. And I would be very upset today if there was another negotiation brought forth that was introducing MTSU to the MAC. I don't think it makes any sense. And even back then, the MAC was trying to get MTSU to sign a 10-year deal. I just don't think, again, you could put yourself into that level of commitment with how much these conferences are already changing on an annual basis. I think locking yourself into a 10-year deal with the MAC, who doesn't really have, in my opinion, an upward trajectory as far as football goes, that I don't think it would be worth signing a 10-year contract.
Yeah, and I do think it's a big part of it, the economics behind all these conferences. Just look at my conference, the MAC, Mid American Conference. We've had a lot of issues regarding economics, and I am concerned about our upcoming media rights deal that may or may not be renewed after 2027. So, knowing that my conference, at least I think my conference needs to do something as far as making moves, adding new schools. I mean, you just hear it. You hear talk about maybe West Kentucky, Middle Tennessee. It just inevitably pops up in conversations. So I'm not holding my breath when it comes to that. It's like, yeah, I think that ship has already sailed concerning Western Kentucky and Middle Tennessee. I mean, I'm not counting it out, but that's just where I'm at right now with that. So yeah, you make a great point about the economics of it, Jake. But with that said, you know, considering the economics of it, what do you think needs to happen if, for whatever reason, something changes for both Conference USA and the MAC? What do you think needs to happen for Western Kentucky and Middle Tennessee to jump ship to any other conference if they have to?
I think for MTSU's sake, where those negotiations fell off years ago was obviously the tenure. I think the tenure was something that was not appealing to the university, as well as athletic director Chris Massaro. I think, and I've had him on my show before to kind of explain or talk us through those negotiations, and that was kind of a big sticking point for us, anyways. And for the most part, we are all for, if Western Kentucky does decide to go to the MAC. I don't think MTSU would be opposed to just letting that happen, and we see how that goes for them, and maybe we feel out the situation and make a move later. That's exactly what Western Kentucky did when we left the Sun Belt. MTSU left Conference USA, and then Western Kentucky came, I think it was 2, maybe 3 years later. So that could potentially happen as well. I don't know that, you brought up a good point that I had also forgotten, the TV rights deal. I mean, Conference USA just signed with CBS Sports Network to air their games or their midweek games for the next, I think it's 8 seasons. Maybe it's down to 7 or 6 seasons now that contract's been signed. But that was a greater money negotiation for the Blue Raiders in particular, but all of Conference USA. You even have the midweek games that are going on right now that are making all of this money. That versus when we were in the conference, we had CUSA TV, which was making us no money at all. The MAC is kind of in their new negotiation. So I think if the MAC had maybe a tenured plan where you can see some stability as far as the finances go, I think maybe MTSU might reconsider it. I just think right now, as someone, I'm not in these talks, and I'm only sharing with you what little information I actually do know. But I have, as a fan, I would have zero interest in leaving Conference USA because of I'm a big proponent of, I want a balanced conference, and that's where I think Conference USA is over the American Athletic Conference, which is an area that I think a lot of fans want to go. A lot of CUSA schools want to go to the American, but we can't make that jump. I mean, even Memphis is throwing millions of dollars, 7 figures at the American conference, and they said, we don't want your money. We don't want Memphis. Or excuse me, that's the Big 12. Excuse me, Memphis
12,
leaving
yeah.
the American to the Big 12. They're throwing 7 figures at the Big 12, and they're saying, well, we don't want that. So that lets you know that kind of money is in the American. So MTSU needs to get to that level as far as financial stability. Right now, they can't win 6 football games. So I think the days of getting to the American are at least 5, 6, 7 years down the road. So if you had your pick between the MAC, Sun Belt, Conference USA is by far and away the better conference in basketball, baseball, softball, all your other Olympic sports as well. I think Conference USA is the place to be. I think once we, again, your your front runners become more of a threat on the national stage, like we saw with Liberty 2 years ago, I think Conference USA again has that upward trajectory where I just don't think the Sun Belt and the MAC have on a consistent basis.
So, moving on to more of a broad question, and this is something that I discuss with other college football fans a lot. The future of college football and college sports in general. In your opinion, Jake, where do you think all this is headed when it comes to governance, when it comes to how everything is structured with college sports and college football, such as topics like NIL, transfer portal, college football playoff, how that's set up, just everything regarding that?
I could really take that question just about anywhere. NIL is something that's been a big topic, especially for us here at MTSU. I know we made a lot of national headlines when we said we weren't doing uniform combinations this year. We're going with one helmet, two jerseys, and one pair of pants all season long, and that collectively saved us almost $700,000 in our annual budget that we could then in turn use for NIL. You're going to see, I think, a lot of that from these universities trying to save a buck somewhere to buy that player. And that's going to forever be, I think, a battle. But I think one thing that people are taking for granted with NIL is we are seeing more parity now at the especially at the top of where the P4s are. But even here at the G5 level, we are seeing a level of parity that we haven't seen in years past, where schools like Liberty, as I touched on earlier, they have a lot more money than any other program. But because of NIL, you are now able to put yourself into a competitive landscape, especially now with the house settlement, and you are able to use revenue sharing. That's going to balance that playing field a little bit more for universities like MTSU when you go up against the likes of Liberty. So I think overall, at some point, we're going to be, I think in 10 years, we're going to be talking about all these athletes becoming state employees and they're going to be under contracts. We're also going to see some of your top earners. They're going to be making less money because at some point, someone's going to realize you can't pay an 18-year-old quarterback $10 million and he's going to perform at $10 million value. So I think at some point, something's got to give. Either the kids are going to get less money or we're going to see more money enter the pool like we have with the house settlement. So how does the NCAA, if that's even a thing in 10 years, how are they going to be able to balance that in terms of football? How is the NCAA going to handle that in things that aren't football? Because the NCAA will still be here for everything else. They may just lose control of how football is handling things. But I'm interested to see how the money gets thrown around. And the other thing that I always get confused about in these conversations when talking about NIL, you'll hear schools say we have X million dollars in our NIL fund. Well, my understanding is NIL is name, image, and likeness. As in, if I'm a student athlete, I make money on my name, image, and likeness. So you can sell merchandise with my name and face on it. You can put my name on the back of the jersey and sell it with my number. I can be in video games. So I make X amount of dollars based on those purchases. Well, how does a university have that in liquid funds? I don't understand. Again, this is all terminology that hasn't been ironed out in legal form, I guess, is how I would understand it. That has always confused me. So there's got to be a way that they've got to circumvent all these issues and make it a little bit more black and white. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to student athletes becoming contracted employees. I don't know that trades are ever going to become a thing, but maybe they all sign 1-year contracts and they're able to up and move. And if that doesn't happen, then you got to get the transfer portal under control. The kids can't be leaving left and right, free willy nilly. Give them, reinstate the 4 and 5, play 4 and 5 years rule. Give them a free transfer if a coach leaves. You know what I mean? There's just so many things that have got to get ironed out that is going to make life harder for G5, yes, but I think NIL has still allowed some stability and some continuity on some of these good programs to sustain that success that they have. But I guess overall, to answer your question, I think there's a lot of details that they haven't figured out yet that is just going to get even muddier and muddier as the years go on. But I look forward to seeing some structure, whether that's at the NCAA stage, even if it becomes a federal thing. But they've got to get it under control because at this point, it just seems like it's complete madness. And that says a lot coming from a G5 fan. I could imagine what P4 fans feel about it as well.
Yeah, I do see a lot more issues popping up for college sports when it comes to how it's run. You and me both were a G6, conference fans, so we could see from a mile away what's going on that maybe some, Power 4 conferences fans may not be able to see right now. So, yeah. So one last question before we start wrapping this up. That would be back to the Blue Raider podcast, what you have on YouTube. What does the future look like for the Blue Raider podcast? What potentially future projects do you have in mind for the Blue Raider podcast that you would like to get off the ground?
Well, I'm super excited about this season in particular. Like I said earlier, I'm entering my second year, or I guess entering my third year of actually running this podcast. So I'm in the middle of season 3 right now. We do 3 weekly uploads on game week. So we do our weekly preview, and then we actually do a segment with an opposition with a member of their podcast team, or maybe a local media member if they don't have a podcast. And then we actually do a post game press conference reaction show that I'm super excited to kind of have short content, kind of fill up my weekly schedule of uploads. So if you were to find yourself wanting to know more about MTSU, I've got you covered with 3 episodes a week, keeping you completely up to date. And that same schedule runs through basketball. Basketball's always been my sport. I mean, obviously everyone loves football, and that's going to get a lot of my views, but basketball is my sport, and I enjoy covering basketball extensively, especially our women's basketball program. As I said earlier, they win. That's a lot of fun to cover winning programs. So I look forward to pumping out a lot of that content. I also cover all the other sports currently through the month of October. I'm actually releasing coach and player exclusive interviews where I sit down with athletes and coaches from the Blue Raiders and get to kind of know them more on a personal level, what they're like off the field. So those are segments that I get super excited about because it's different than my weekly football talks or soon to be basketball talks. So I want to carry that schedule on for the rest of this year. I just think that form of content for those that are maybe podcasters that are listening, I've learned that the shorter content seems to be a lot easier for those fans to really like sit down, on their ride to work in the morning, 20, 30 minutes, and they can swallow all the Blue Raider stuff that they can in that moment. So I love that short form stuff, but of course we've taken our social media game to the next level too. So I'm excited for what the Blue Raider podcast has become this year. I just kind of always wish, football was a little bit better, because when football does well, all the media does well. We get more clicks, more views, but overall, I like where the podcast is at, and I look forward to kind of seeing its growth now that we've taken on sponsorships and that's the kind of thing. So it's grown a lot in season 3.
Yeah, I recently discovered the Blue Raider podcast, and from what I've watched a few of your shows, and you do a great job, Jake. I really do appreciate what you do. As we both know, because we both run shows, it's not easy. It's not easy doing this on YouTube. So I can understand the hard work that's put into these things. So yeah, keep up the good work, Jake. I really do appreciate having you on my show, and for you guys watching this right now, I will provide a link to the Blue Raider podcast YouTube channel in the description box below, so you can check it out. Check out what Jake has to say about the Blue Raiders in any sports. Yeah, so just in summary, yeah, Middle Tennessee, one of those schools that I'm quietly rooting for in general. Of course, I always root for the Ohio Bobcats, but in general for other schools, I want other Group of Six schools to do well, such as Middle Tennessee. So, yeah, so thank you so much, Jake. I really do appreciate it. And this was episode number 15 of Stephen Interviews You. And we'll be back with more content soon enough. Take care, guys.